Before we start today's story, I want to talk to you, the family that built this channel. When we started, we told stories about bikers because they represent something lost in this country. Loyalty, brotherhood, protection. But you and I both know, bikers aren't the only ones who live by that code. A cowboy freezing in the snow to save a calf. A veteran walking into a storm to find a lost child. They are cut from the same cloth. They are protectors. So, starting today, we are expanding our campfire. We are changing our name to Bowl American Stories. We aren't leaving the bikes behind, never. But we are adding the ranchers, the soldiers, and the drifters who built this land. Same grit, same justice, just a bigger family. Today, we're going back to 1880. To a rancher who faced down the whole U.S. Army to save 3 children. I hope you'll ride with us. Henry Duke found 2 Apache girls bleeding in the snow with a starving wolf circling for the kill, saved their lives with 1 clean shot, and thought that was the end of it. 24 hours later, armed men surrounded his cabin demanding the girls back in chains, and Henry realized saving them was the easy part. Keeping them alive would cost him everything. Before we get into the blood and the betrayal, I want to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or state in the comments right now. I read every single one, and it means the world to know how far these stories of justice and family travel. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We tell stories about real men, real courage, and the kind of justice that doesn't wait for a courtroom. Now, settle in. The cold came down from the mountains like a living thing that winter, hungry, searching, patient as death itself. Henry Duke felt it seep through the chinks in his cabin walls, heard it whisper through the pines that stood like sentinels around his lonely acre. He didn't mind the cold. Cold was honest. Cold didn't lie to you or leave you wondering. It just took what it wanted and moved on. He sat by the iron stove, mending a bridle strap by lamplight, his hands moving with the slow precision of a man who'd learned long ago that hurrying gets you nowhere worth going. The leather was old, cracked in places, but good leather never truly dies. It just needs a man patient enough to bring it back. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago. He didn't bother heating it up. Sarah used to fuss about that, used to pour it out and make him a fresh cup whether he asked or not. But Sarah had been gone 3 winters now, buried under the ponderosa pine she loved, where the wild flowers came up every spring like purple promises. The silence in the cabin was thick as wool. Henry had grown accustomed to it the way a man grows accustomed to a missing limb. You learn to live with the absence, but you never stop feeling where it used to be. Outside, the wind pushed against the door like an unwelcome visitor. The horses in the barn were quiet. Everything was as it should be in the high country on a January night, when sensible folks were 20 miles down the valley and only fools and hermits stayed up in the timber. Then he heard it. A scream, high and sharp, cut through the wind like a knife through hide. Henry's hands stopped moving. He set the bridle down slow, his head cocked toward the door. For a moment, he wondered if he'd imagined it. Sometimes the wind played tricks up here, made sounds that weren't sounds, voices that weren't voices. Sometimes grief did the same thing. Then it came again, clearer this time. A child's scream, 2 of them. Henry Duke was on his feet before his mind had fully caught up with his body. He reached for the Winchester propped beside the door, checked the chamber with practiced fingers, and shrugged into his heavy coat. His boots hit the porch boards 3 seconds later, breath smoking in the frozen air. The screaming came from the north ridge, up where the timber grew thick and the game trails wound through deadfall and snow. He moved through the darkness like a man half his age, 60 years of mountain living in every step. The moon was a thin slice overhead, giving just enough light to see by if you knew where to look. The screams had stopped. That worried him more than the screaming had. He crested the ridge and saw them. Two small figures backed against a granite outcrop, and circling them, head low and ribs showing through mangy fur, was a timber wolf. Not a big one, but big enough. Starving by the look of it. Winter desperate and mean. The kind of wolf that had stopped being afraid of anything, except the gnawing ache in its belly. The older girl, couldn't have been more than 10, had her arms spread wide, trying to make herself big, trying to shield the smaller one behind her. Brave little thing, foolish but brave. The younger one was pressed against the rock, eyes wide as silver dollars. Henry raised the rifle smooth and steady, the stock settling against his shoulder like it had 10,000 times before. He didn't hurry. Hurrying made you miss. Missing made you dead, or worse, made someone else dead. The wolf's muscles bunched for the lunge. Henry squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the stillness like thunder breaking. The wolf dropped mid-leap, hitting the snow in a heap of matted fur and empty hunger. One shot. Clean. The way Sarah used to say he did everything, one thing at a time, and done right. For a moment, nobody moved. The gun smoke drifted pale in the moonlight. The girls stared at the dead wolf, then at him. The older one was shaking, not from fear, Henry realized, but from the cold. They wore thin doeskin dresses, no coats, their legs bare from the knee down. Their feet were wrapped in strips of cloth that had once been moccasins. They'd been running a long time. Henry lowered the rifle, kept his movement slow and deliberate. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentle as wind through grass. "Easy. The wolf's gone. Won't hurt you no more." The older girl said something in a language he didn't know. Apache, maybe, though he was no expert. Her voice was steady despite the shaking. Protective. Defiant even now. She was telling him to stay back, he figured. Or maybe she was praying. Sometimes they were the same thing. Henry shrugged out of his coat, held it toward them with one hand, the rifle lowered in the other. The cold bit into him instant and mean, but he'd been colder. He took a step forward, stopped when the older girl tensed. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said quiet, like he was talking to a skittish colt in a box canyon. "But you'll freeze to death out here before morning. That's just plain fact. Now, I got a cabin about 5 minutes that way." He nodded south. "Got a fire and hot food and blankets warmer than July. You can take the coat, follow me down, and we'll figure the rest out once you ain't turning blue." The older girl stared at him, black eyes searching his face for the lie. Henry just stood there, coat extended, waiting. A man could only offer. The rest was up to them. Finally, Lord, it felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds, the girl reached out and took the coat. She wrapped it around both of them, buried them both in wool and worn canvas that probably smelled like horse and coffee and wood smoke. Henry turned without another word and started walking back toward the cabin. He didn't look behind him to see if they followed. That would have been an insult to their pride, and he figured they'd lost enough already. But he heard their footsteps in the snow behind him, light and quick, and something in his chest that had been frozen solid for 3 winters started, just barely, to thaw. He'd think about what that meant later. Right now, he had to get these girls inside before the cold took them. Because somewhere out in that darkness, beyond the firelight and the safety of log walls, Henry Duke could feel eyes watching. And whatever those girls were running from hadn't given up the chase. Not yet. The cabin door closed behind them like the ceiling of a tomb, shutting out the wind and the dark and whatever else prowled the night. Henry moved to the stove first, stirred the coals back to life, added 2 split logs that caught and crackled like breaking bones. The warmth spread slow at first, then all at once, filling the space with a smell of burning pine and something almost like safety. The girls stood just inside the doorway, huddled together under his coat, eyes darting around the cabin like rabbits caught in lamplight, taking inventory, looking for exits. Smart girls. "Beans are on the stove," Henry said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Coffee, too, if you're old enough for it. Water's in the bucket by the basin." He moved to the pantry, pulled down 2 tin plates and 2 cups, set them on the table gentle as if they might spook. "Go on now. Warm yourselves." The older girl, he figured she was the one calling the shots, whispered something to the younger one, then led her toward the fire. They moved together, never more than a hand's width apart. The younger one's teeth were chattering so hard Henry could hear them from across the room. He ladled beans onto both plates, poured water into the cups, set them on the table and stepped back, gave them space. A man didn't crowd frightened things if he wanted them to trust him. His daddy had taught him that with horses. Turned out it worked with people, too. The older girl watched him for a long moment, then sat. The younger one followed. And Lord, the way they ate, careful and quick at the same time, like they expected someone to snatch it away. When was the last time they'd had a hot meal? Days, maybe longer. Henry settled into his chair by the stove, the one he always sat in. Sarah's chair sat empty across from him, her knitting basket still beside it. A half-finished scarf draped over the arm like she'd just set it down to check the stove. 3 winters, and he still couldn't bring himself to move it. But tonight, with the girls at his table, the cabin didn't feel quite so hollow. The silence wasn't so heavy. It was just quiet. The good kind of quiet, the kind you get when the wind stops howling and the work is done, and there's nothing left to do but rest. The younger one looked up at him with eyes dark as creek stones, and for just a heartbeat she smiled. Henry felt something crack inside his chest, not painful, but close to it. The kind of ache you get when ice starts to melt after a long, bitter winter. He was about to ask the older girl her name when he heard it. Hoofbeats, coming up the trail fast. Both girls went rigid, plates forgotten. The older one grabbed the younger one's hand, pulled her to her feet. Their faces had gone pale as new snow, and Henry saw it then. The raw animal terror of prey that knows the predator has found its trail. Outside, a woman's voice called out in Apache, sharp and desperate. The cabin door rattled, and Henry Duke realized that whatever he'd saved these girls from tonight was standing on his porch, demanding them back. But when he opened that door, rifle ready, what he found wasn't danger. It was a mother's love wrapped in desperation and frost. Naya was her name, and the way those girls flew to her, the way she held them like she'd been drowning, and they were air itself, well, that told Henry everything he needed to know. She'd offered herself in payment. "A life saved must be repaid," she'd said in broken English, her eyes proud despite the fear. Henry had refused, said no debt was owed for doing what was right. But he'd offered them shelter, warmth, and hospitality until they figured out what came next. That had been 3 days ago. 3 days of something Henry hadn't felt in longer than he cared to remember. Peace. Nia mended his shirts with stitches so small they looked like magic. The older girl, Tala, helped with the horses, quiet and watchful. Little Winona followed him around like a shadow, chattering in Apache that he didn't understand but somehow felt in his bones. The cabin had started to feel like a home again instead of a tomb. That's when the hoofbeats came a second time. Henry was splitting wood when he heard them, 2 horses, coming up the trail with the kind of purpose that meant trouble. He set the axe down slow, wiped his hands on his trousers, and waited. Sheriff Griggs rode up first, his deputy a half-length behind. Griggs sat his horse like a man who'd bought the saddle but never earned the right to it, all stiff and showy. His badge caught the morning light, but his eyes were dark as creek mud. "Mercer," Griggs said, not bothering with pleasantries. His gaze drifted past Henry to where Nia stood in the cabin doorway, the girls behind her. "Heard you got yourself some visitors. Apache visitors." "I got guests," Henry said, his voice level as a carpenter's plane. "That's all you need to know." "That's so." Griggs shifted in his saddle, glanced at his deputy like they were sharing a joke. "See, I got a telegram from the fort. Says 3 Apache girls went missing from the relocation. Says they're wards of the territorial government. Needed for an orphanage placement down in Santa Fe. Says anyone harboring them is in violation of federal law." Henry felt his jaw tighten. He knew a lie the way a cattleman knows a lame horse, by the way it limps when it tries to walk. "Those girls ain't going nowhere," Henry said quiet. Nia stepped forward then, and Lord, she stood tall, spine straight as a lodgepole pine, chin up, fearless. "They are my daughters," she said, her English clear and sharp. "Not yours, not the government's." Griggs smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Apache don't got property rights, woman. Don't got family rights neither, not anymore. You signed them over when you took rations at the fort." "I signed nothing." "Well, maybe you did and don't remember. Maybe you didn't and it don't matter." Griggs leaned forward in his saddle. "Point is, I'll be back tomorrow with a warrant and federal escort. You can hand them over peaceful, or we can do this the hard way." Henry stepped between the sheriff and Nia, his boots making solid sounds on the frozen ground. "You best ride on out of here, Griggs, before you say something that can't be unsaid." The sheriff's face went hard as winter stone. "I'll be back with a warrant, Duke. Don't make this a war you can't win." He wheeled his horse around, his deputy following. They rode back down the trail, and Henry watched them go until they were nothing but dust and bad intentions. Behind him, Nia spoke soft. "They will come back." "I know it," Henry said. What he didn't say was that when they came back, they'd find out that some men don't bend, don't break, and don't run. And Sheriff Griggs had just picked a fight with exactly that kind of man. Henry didn't sleep that night. Sleep was a luxury for peaceful times, and peace had ridden out with Sheriff Griggs. He moved through the cabin in the pre-dawn dark, checking supplies, ammunition, water, food stores, the kind of inventory a man makes when he knows trouble's coming and can't say when it'll arrive. His hands worked automatic, muscle memory from a war he'd thought was behind him. Turned out some wars never end. They just change uniforms. By first light, he had the shutters reinforced. Extra timber braced against the door. He pulled down the Winchester from above the mantel, checked the action, then looked at Nia where she sat watching him with those dark, knowing eyes. "You ever fire a rifle?" he asked. "No." "You're gonna learn." He showed her slow and patient. How to load the cartridges, how to work the lever, how to breathe steady before the trigger pull. She learned fast, the way people learn when their children's lives depend on it. By noon, she could hit a pine cone at 50 yards. That's when the weather turned. The wind came first, howling down from the high peaks like the devil's own breath. Then the snow, thick and heavy, falling so fast it erased the world. Within an hour, Henry couldn't see past the barn. The temperature dropped like a stone down a well. "The White Death," Nia said softly, watching through the window. "My grandmother spoke of storms like this. They bury everything." Henry nodded. The storm cut both ways. It trapped them here, but it also made travel near impossible. Griggs wouldn't risk his neck in weather like this. They had time, or so he thought. That evening, Henry went to check on the horses. Something felt wrong the moment he stepped into the barn. The air was off. The horses were spooked, eyes rolling white, ears pinned back. His gelding was stamping and snorting like he'd seen a cougar. Then Henry saw it, the corral fence, cut clean through in 3 places. Someone had been here. His hand went to his revolver. He turned slow, scanning the barn, the shadows between the stalls. Nothing moved, but the message was clear as church bells on Sunday morning. "We can get to you any time we want." He was heading back to the cabin when Nia's voice cut through the storm. "Henry! 3 men, north side!" He spun. Nia stood on the porch, rifle in hand, pointing into the white chaos. Henry couldn't see a damn thing through the blizzard. Just snow and more snow. "How can you—" "There." She pointed again. "The snow moves different when men walk through it. See the pattern? They circle toward the barn." And Lord help him, once she pointed it out, he could see it. The subtle disturbance in the storm. The shadow shapes moving like wolves through sheep country. Griggs hadn't waited for a warrant. He'd sent his hired guns in under cover of the storm. Henry and Nia locked eyes across the distance. No words needed. They both knew what came next. Inside the cabin, he could hear the girls singing softly to each other, innocent and unaware. And out in the storm, the wolves were closing in. The first shot shattered the window above the kitchen basin. Glass exploded inward. The girls screamed. Henry was moving before the sound finished echoing, grabbing Tala and Winona, pulling them to the floor behind the heavy oak table. "Stay down," he barked. "Don't move unless I say." Nia was already at the east window, Winchester up. She fired twice, fast, controlled, the way he'd taught her. More shots answered from the storm. Muzzle flashes lit up the white like lightning. Henry counted them. 3 shooters, maybe 4. They'd spread out. Smart. Made themselves harder targets. Henry dropped to one knee beside the west window, shouldered his rifle, breathed out slow. A shadow moved through the snow 30 yards out. Henry squeezed the trigger. The shadow's hat flew off like a bird taking flight. The man dove for cover, cursing loud enough to hear through the storm. "Next one's lower," Henry called out to the darkness. His voice was cold. Final. "Your choice." Another shooter broke from behind the barn, running toward the cabin, stupid, eager, young. Henry tracked him smooth as silk, led him just right, fired. The bullet kicked up snow 6 inches in front of the man's boots. The runner went down hard, scrambling back the way he came, terror making him clumsy. Folks, these hired guns thought they were messing with a farmer. They didn't know Henry Duke walked through hell in '64 and came out the other side with ice in his veins. Old men don't get old by being stupid. They get old by being dangerous and patient in equal measure. Nia fired again. "One retreating," she said, calm. Like she was calling out Wash hung on a line. Henry moved to the north window, checked the girls. Tala had her arms wrapped around Winona, both of them pressed flat against the floorboards. Brave girls, quiet as church mice, even with the world exploding around them. "You're doing fine," Henry told them. "Won't be long now." He hoped that was true. Another volley hit the cabin. Wood splintered, a lamp shattered. The door shook against its braces but held. Henry returned fire. 3 shots, 3 different positions, keeping them guessing, keeping them scared. The attackers tried rushing the door together. Big mistake. Henry and Naya fired as one. The men scattered like quail, flushed from cover. One left his rifle in the snow. Another was limping. "They're breaking," Naya said. Henry nodded, but he didn't lower his rifle. He'd seen men break before, seen them come back meaner. For 10 minutes nothing moved but the snow. Then Henry heard it, a voice from the tree line. "We're pulling back, Duke, but this ain't over." Hoofbeats faded into the storm. Henry waited, watched. Finally lowered the Winchester. He checked the ammunition box. 6 rounds left, maybe 7. Nia was already counting hers. 4, she said quietly. The girls were crying now, soft, scared. Henry knelt beside them, put a hand on each of their heads. "It's over," he told them. "You're safe." But over his shoulder, through the broken window, he could see fresh snow already covering the attackers' tracks. Come morning, there'd be no proof this ever happened. No witnesses except the 4 of them. And Griggs still had the law on his side. Nia met his eyes across the cabin. She didn't need to say it. They'd won the battle. But the war was just starting. They came back at dawn. Not with bullets this time, with fire. Henry smelled the smoke before he saw the flames. Sharp, bitter, wrong. He looked up. Orange light flickered through the ceiling boards. "The roof," he said. Naya was already moving. She grabbed the water bucket. Henry climbed onto the table, pushed open the roof hatch. Heat blasted down like opening an oven door. 3 torches burned on the cabin's peak. Pitch-soaked rags tied to arrows. They'd launched them in the gray light before dawn, quiet as ghosts. Henry pulled himself up onto the roof. The shingles were old, dry, hungry for flame. He grabbed the first torch, threw it into the snow, reached for the second. His boot slipped on ice. He went down hard, slid fast. His ribs hit the roof edge like a sledgehammer. Something cracked. Pain, white hot, and blinding. He tumbled off, hit the ground, couldn't breathe. The world went sideways. Gray, cold. Inside the cabin, the girls were screaming. Henry tried to stand. His left leg buckled. Twisted knee. Maybe worse. He dragged himself toward the door, each movement a fresh kind of agony. Smoke poured from the cabin now, thick, black. The fire had found the dry timber in the walls. The door burst open. Nia came out first, the girls behind her. Their faces were soot-stained, coughing, eyes streaming. That's when the riders appeared. Sheriff Griggs, 6 men with him this time. They came out of the tree line like wolves who'd finally cornered their prey. "Well now," Griggs said, dismounting slow. "Looks like you had an accident." "Duke." Henry tried to raise his rifle. Couldn't. It was still inside the burning cabin. 2 deputies grabbed Naya. She fought like a wildcat, but they were too strong. They bound her wrists with rope. "No!" Henry roared. He tried to stand. Failed. Fell back into the snow. Griggs walked over, looked down at him like he was studying a bug. "The girls are wards of the state now," Griggs said. "The woman's under arrest for kidnapping, and you—" He smiled. Cold, empty. You're gonna freeze to death right where you lay." Tala was crying. Winona reached for Henry. A deputy pulled her back. "Please," Naya said. Her voice broke. "Please, he is hurt. He will die." "That's the idea, darling." Griggs mounted up. His men loaded Nia onto a horse, the girls into a wagon. Iron chains rattled in the morning air. Henry watched them go. Watched until they disappeared into the trees, watched until the only sound was the fire eating his home and the wind laughing through the pines. He lay in the snow, broken, beaten, alone. The cold was already creeping in, and Henry Duke wondered if this was how his story ended, frozen and forgotten in the high country, having failed the only people who'd needed him in 3 long years. Henry didn't remember crawling to the barn. One moment he was in the snow, the world going gray at the edges. The next he was pressed against his gelding's warm belly, the horse's heat the only thing keeping the darkness back. The cold wanted him, whispered promises of sleep, of rest, of an end to the pain. Henry thought about Sarah, thought about those 3 years he'd spent waiting to join her. Then he thought about Winona's face, when the deputy pulled her away, the way she'd reached for him. "Not today," he said through frozen lips. "Not like this." He forced himself up, used the stall wall, the horse's mane, anything. His ribs screamed, his knee was swollen tight as a drum. Didn't matter. Pain was just noise. You could ignore noise if you had to. Took him 20 minutes to saddle the gelding. Had to rest twice. Nearly passed out once, but he got it done. He rode west, toward the McAllister place. The storm had passed. The sun was climbing. The world was white and clean and beautiful, and Henry hated every inch of it. McAllister's ranch sat in a valley 3 miles over. Smoke rose from the chimney. Henry nearly fell off the horse when he tried to dismount. The door opened. Jonas McAllister stood there, 70 if he was a day, built like an oak stump, arms still thick from 40 years working a forge. "Good Lord," Jonas said. He caught Henry before he hit the ground. Inside, there were 2 others. Elijah Washington, a former Buffalo soldier with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen too much, and Silent Pete, the trapper, hadn't spoken a word since the Comanche took his tongue back in '68, but could track a ghost across solid rock. They got Henry to a chair, got coffee in him, whiskey for the pain. "Griggs," Henry said. Each word cost him. "Took them, the woman and her girls, chained them like animals." Jonas's jaw tightened. "When?" "This morning." Elijah stood, walked to the wall, pulled down a cavalry carbine that looked older than God but probably still shot straight as judgment. "They're children," Henry said. His voice cracked. "Just little girls. And Griggs is going to ship them off to some orphanage, pocket the federal money, and sleep fine doing it." Silent Pete was already at the door, pulling on his coat. He looked back at the others, nodded once. Jonas went to the cabinet, pulled out his old leather gun belt, strapped it on like he'd never taken it off. "How many men Griggs got?" Jonas asked. 6. "Maybe 8. And how many we got?" Henry looked around the room. 4 old men, broken down, used up, should have been sitting by fires telling grandchildren stories. 4, he said. Jonas smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who'd been waiting for one last fight and was glad it finally showed up. "Then I like our odds," Jonas said. "The young ones today, they don't remember what old men can do when they get righteous mad." Elijah chambered around. The sound was loud in the quiet room. Final. "They took children," Elijah said. His voice was deep, steady. That's all I need to know." They armed themselves, checked their weapons, moved with the slow purpose of men who knew this might be their last ride, but were going anyway. Henry pulled himself onto his horse. The pain nearly blinded him. He stayed upright through pure stubbornness. Jonas mounted beside him. "We'll get them back, Henry." "Or die trying," Elijah added. Silent Pete just nodded, and the old guard rode toward town. 4 men against the law itself, carrying nothing but old rifles and older rage. They rode into town just past noon. 4 riders, moving slow down Main Street. The hoofbeats echoed off the storefronts like drum beats before a hanging. People stopped, stared, stepped back onto the boardwalks. Henry rode in front. His face was pale, his jaw set. Blood had seeped through his shirt from the broken ribs, but he sat that saddle straight as a fence post. Behind him came Jonas, Elijah, and Silent Pete, old men on old horses, but there was something in the way they moved that made grown men look away. The sheriff's office sat at the end of the street. A wagon waited outside. The morning stagecoach. 2 deputies were loading crates into the back. Henry could see them through the jail window. Naya, the girls, chained. He dismounted, slow, deliberate. His knee nearly gave out. He caught himself on the saddle horn, breathed through the pain. The others dismounted with him. Sheriff Griggs stepped out of his office. 4 deputies flanked him, hands on their guns. "You boys lost?" Griggs said, but his voice wasn't steady anymore. "We came for the woman and the girls," Henry said. No anger in his voice, just fact. "You're going to release them, now." Griggs laughed. It sounded forced. "Or what? 4 old fools going to take on the law?" "If that's what it takes," Jonas said. A crowd was gathering. Townspeople, store owners, the banker, the preacher. They sensed blood in the air. Henry took a step forward. His hand rested on his revolver. "You want to know what law you're upholding, Sheriff? Open that saddlebag on your horse." Griggs' face went red. "You got no right." "Open it." Jonas moved to Griggs' horse, flipped open the saddlebag, pulled out a leather pouch. Coins spilled into his hand. Gold, federal currency. "This the orphanage money?" Jonas asked, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Funny. Thought that was supposed to go to Santa Fe, not into your personal bags." The crowd murmured, shifted. A woman gasped. "You're shipping those girls off," Henry said, his voice carrying. "Gonna collect the federal bounty for relocating them. Pocket half. Send the rest to your cousin who runs that fake orphanage in Santa Fe. I checked. Sent a telegram yesterday. That place burned down 2 years ago." Griggs' hand dropped to his gun. "You're a liar." "Then prove me wrong. Show the town the paperwork." Griggs couldn't, because there wasn't any. The deputies were looking at each other now, uncertain. One of them stepped back, then another. "This is done, Griggs," Henry said. "You can walk away, or you can draw." For a moment nobody breathed. Griggs drew. Henry was faster. The shot cracked like thunder. Griggs's gun hit the dirt. He grabbed his hand, screaming. Henry had shot him through the palm, clean through. "Next one's your heart," Henry said. Griggs fell to his knees. The deputies put their hands up, surrendered. Silent Pete went to the jail, came out with the keys, unlocked Naya's chains first, then the girls. Tala and Winona ran to Henry, nearly knocked him over. He caught them with his good arm, held them tight, and for the first time in 3 days, he smiled. The crowd parted as they walked to their horses. Nobody tried to stop them. The preacher called out, "God bless you, Henry Duke." Henry didn't answer. He just lifted the girls onto his horse, helped Nia up behind them, and started the long ride home. Behind them, the town arrested its own sheriff. Justice, Henry figured, was a strange and beautiful thing when it finally showed up. Spring came to the high country like a promise kept. The snow melted, the creek ran high and clear, wildflowers pushed through the thawed ground, purple and yellow and white, like hope made visible. Henry stood on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun climb over the eastern peaks. His ribs had healed. His knees still ached when the weather turned. But that was just life, reminding him he was still alive. Behind him, inside the rebuilt cabin, he could hear them. Nia was singing something in Apache, soft, beautiful. A morning prayer, maybe. Tala was helping with breakfast. The girl had taken to cooking like she'd been born to it. And Winona was chattering about the baby goat Jonas had brought over yesterday, talking so fast her words tumbled over each other like water over stones. The cabin smelled like fry bread and coffee and wood smoke. It smelled like home. The neighbors had come when they'd returned from town. Jonas and Elijah and Silent Pete, others too. The whole valley, it seemed. They'd brought timber and nails and strong backs. Within a week the cabin had a new roof, stronger than the old one. That's what community did. It showed up. Griggs was in territorial prison now. 20 years for embezzlement and attempted murder. His deputies had scattered like smoke. The town had a new sheriff, a younger man but honest, the kind who understood that the badge was meant to protect, not control. The door opened behind Henry. Nia stepped out, wrapped in Sarah's old shawl. She'd asked permission first. Henry had given it gladly. Sarah would have liked her, would have liked all of them. Nia held something in her hands, a small leather pouch. She opened it. Blue corn seeds spilled into her palm like tiny pieces of sky. "My grandmother's," Nia said. "The last of our family line. I want to plant them here, if this is home now." Henry's throat tightened. He nodded. "This is home," he said. "Long as you want it to be." She smiled, reached out, took his hand. Not as payment. Not as debt, just as family does. Inside, the girls were laughing about something. The sound carried through the open door, filled the morning air, chased away the last of winter's ghosts. Henry looked at Nia, at the seeds in her hand, at the cabin with its new roof and its full table and its loud, beautiful life. He thought about Sarah, about how she used to say that love wasn't something you found. It was something you built, board by board, day by day, through the hard seasons and the good ones. He understood now. The hands that once held cold iron and colder loneliness now held warm coffee and warmer purpose. The silence that had haunted this cabin for 3 long years was gone, replaced by the sound of children laughing and a woman singing and a future that looked a whole lot brighter than the past. Henry Duke had thought his story was over, thought he was done with the world. Turned out, the world wasn't done with him. Peace is rare. Love is rarer. And sometimes the best rewards aren't gold or glory or promises written on paper. Sometimes the best rewards are the people who stay when the snow falls, who stand with you when the wolves circle, who look at your broken-down cabin and your broken-down heart and say, "We can fix this, together." Blood makes you kin, but showing up when the fire starts, that's what makes you family. If you believe that one act of mercy can change everything, that standing up for someone who can't defend themselves is worth the cost, then like and share this story. Subscribe now for more stories about courage, loyalty, and the kind of brotherhood that doesn't need a patch to prove it's real. Also check out the 2 videos showing on the screen right now, specially crafted for you.